The word Chinese refers to Standard Chinese, which is based on Mandarin, but it also refers to a large group of languages and dialects spoken throughout China and indeed throughout the world. All Chinese languages are tonal languages. The meaning of a word depends on the tone or the tones that you say it with.
吃
10 是
If you change the tone, the meaning of the word changes. There are more than 1.3 billion native speakers of Chinese, if we include all its varieties. Standard Chinese, generally referred to as Mandarin, is the official language of the People's Republic of China, the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, or Chinese Taipei, and it's one of the 4 official languages of Singapore. Chinese languages are also spoken in lots of diaspora communities throughout Asia, like in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and in different communities around the world.
There's no verb conjugation in Chinese. For example, the word she means to be in Chinese. It also means am, are, is, was, were, had been, has been, will be, would have been, would have been. There's plenty more, I'm sure. And it doesn't even change for different people. I, she, you, she, we, she, he, she, they, she, it, she, everything. She is one of the oldest languages in the world. The first examples of written Old Chinese date back to around 1200 BC. This means that the language has plenty of history to delve into as you learn more and more about the language. History equals culture. Because the language and the country date back so far, and because the country is so big, there's plenty of culture to dig your teeth into and really get involved with. So much good stuff to see. Nature lover, you're set. You've got natural sites such as Tiger Leaping Gorge, the Reed Fruit Cave, and Yuan Yang Rice Terraces. If you prefer man-made sites, you've got the Great Wall of China, the Terracotta Warriors, and the Forbidden City. China is packed with places to go and things to see. Oh, and pandas.
In the late 19th century, towards the end of the Qing dynasty, the specific dialect of Beijing started to grow in importance and became the new high variety of Chinese, replacing the older high variety which was based on a number of different dialects. At the beginning of the 20th century, a form of written vernacular Chinese based on a number of Mandarin dialects was introduced as the new official written language instead of classical Chinese. But it was later decided that the new official language should be based specifically on the Beijing dialect. This new standard language was called
普通话
which means common language, or
国语
which means national language. People often refer to this standard language as Mandarin because it's based on the Mandarin dialect of Beijing. But to be precise, the word Mandarin refers to a range of northern dialects. Standard Chinese, or Mandarin, now fulfills the role that classical Chinese used to fulfill as the official written language that's used by speakers of all varieties of Chinese for most purposes. But written vernacular languages still do exist and are used for some informal situations. It's often said that there are over 200 distinct varieties of Chinese, which comprise around 13 distinct dialect groups. The local dialects within each of these groups are often intelligible, so it's reasonable to consider these groups as languages. There are 7 that are generally considered major. These are Mandarin,
官话
Yue,
粤语
Shang,
香
Min,
满
Gan,
港语
Wu,
五日
and Hakka.
客家话
The earliest Chinese characters were based on pictures of things that we come across in our day-to-day lives. Over time, these pictures were refined into the characters we see today. Now, while these pictographic characters may be easy to remember, only about 4% of modern Chinese characters have been created this way. Create indicative characters where basic concepts are represented with a small number of simple strokes, such as the characters for 1, 2, and 3, and above and below. The other way was by combining existing characters together to give new meanings. These types of characters are known as associative characters. For example, the character
从
is created by combining one person character behind another person character to convey the meaning to follow. 3 trees here are combined in the character for
森
to mean a forest. It still only covers about 14% of modern Chinese characters. The pictophonetic method. Let's say we want to create a character for the word
湖
meaning a lake. We start off by taking an existing character that has the same sound, in this case the character
湖
meaning Mongol or Tartar, 2 of the northern tribes of China. We then add a picture radical to differentiate the character and to convey its meaning. In this case, we add the water radical to the left, and now we have a new character for the word hu, meaning lake. Using this method, we can also create the character hu, meaning paste, by adding the rice radical. Paste, in ancient times, often being made from rice flour. Around 80% of modern Chinese characters have been created this way. Generally, they're on the left, top, or outside of the character, but they can also occur on the right, bottom, or inside of the character. Unfortunately, there is no guaranteed way of locating radicals, and for a small number of characters, the radical can only be identified by referring to a dictionary. Just look at the tree radical in these characters, or the grass radical here, or the hand radical here, or the eye radical here. They are all very easy to identify. A phonetic drift, where the pronunciation of the phonetic component is modified between characters. Take the simple character 半. Using this character as the phonetic component, we can create a new character by adding the person radical, giving us the character 半, meaning a companion. So far, so good. However, in this character, 盼, we can see that the pronunciation has changed from the original B sound to an aspirated P sound. This is also the case for this character, 盼, meaning to rebel. In this character, 胖, we can see that the sound has drifted further from the original nasal N sound to the nasal NG sound. This phonetic drift has come about because characters have been developed over thousands of years by Chinese people speaking varying dialects. Phonetic drift mostly occurs between similarly sounding initials. For example, the Z and C sounds here in 足 and 醋. There are 3 key steps to learning Chinese characters efficiently. Step 1. First, you should start with the simplest characters. Although characters are written as a series of strokes, they are more logically thought of as consisting of one or more basic components. Before studying complex characters, you should familiarize yourself with the basic components. For example, beginner students might not realize that the characters 木 and 耳 here are actually 2 different characters, not the same character written differently. The same with 人 and 入. So it helps to see them together and study them at the same time. Step 2. Once you're comfortable with the basic components, you can start looking at characters that share a common phonetic root. That way, you can leverage the pictophonetic method to quickly learn series of related characters. Sometimes the pictophonetic method works really well, like in these characters that are all based on the character 方. Other times it works well, but there is some phonetic drift. There are also times when it works well for some characters, but not for others. Even so, it makes sense to study these characters together so you know where the exceptions are. Step 3. Finally, you should study easily confused characters together. For example, these characters have no real relationship to each other, but are easily confused. Studying them together helps you to learn how to differentiate them so they're easier to remember. If you are systematic and approach learning Chinese characters the right way, you'll be amazed at how quickly you can learn them.
There are traditional characters, the ones that are written as they were in classical Chinese, and then there are simplified characters, which were created in the 1950s and 60s to increase literacy. Simplified characters are used in the People's Republic of China and in Singapore. Traditional characters are used in Taiwan and in Hong Kong and Macau, which were not under Chinese rule when simplified characters were introduced. They are also used in many Chinese diaspora communities. Here's a traditional character on the left, and here's its simplified equivalent on the right. So you can see that they are different, and it's probably easier to write the simplified one. But despite the differences, literate native speakers generally have no trouble reading either type of character. Mandarin is spoken by 960 million native speakers, mainly in the north of China, but is now used all over mainland China and Taiwan as the official language of government, media, and education, and it's one of the 4 official languages of Singapore as well. Cantonese, on the other hand, is spoken by 50 to 60 million native speakers in Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, and some adjacent areas, as well as in Chinese diaspora communities around the world. The difference between Mandarin and Cantonese lies in pronunciation. Both of these languages are tonal languages, but they each have a different number of tones. Mandarin has 4 tones, plus 1 neutral tone. There's a high flat tone, a rising tone, a falling rising tone, a falling tone, and the neutral tone. For example,
包薄宝报
the neutral tone is a short de-emphasized syllable which is said with no regard to tone. Cantonese has 6 basic tones. There's a high flat tone, a mid-rising tone, a mid-flat tone, a low falling tone, a low rising tone, and a low flat tone.
C, 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 C.
Some people count 3 additional tones for a total of 9. These are historical tones that were used for syllables ending in p, t, or k. In standard Cantonese, they've merged with other tones, so that the only remainder of these tones is the stop consonant at the end of the syllable. But each character is pronounced differently in Mandarin and Cantonese. One example of this is the word for I. In Mandarin, it's pronounced
我
with the third tone, or falling rising tone, while in Cantonese it's pronounced
我
with the fifth tone, or low rising tone. So the tone is different, but also notice that the initial consonant sound is different as well. Another example is this word, which means China. In Mandarin it's pronounced
中国
with a high flat tone and a rising tone. And in Cantonese it's pronounced
中国
with a high flat tone and a mid-flat tone.
中国
中国
The pronunciation of these 2 words might sound pretty close, but the tones are partially different. And remember that the meaning of words is partly determined by tones. There are also characters that have the same pronunciation in one language, but different pronunciations in the other. In Mandarin there's,
谢写写
but in Cantonese they're pronounced.
在海在
Here we can see that the Mandarin sounds don't consistently correspond with Cantonese sounds. In Mandarin they're pronounced the same, except for the tones, but the 3 words are pronounced in 3 completely different ways in Cantonese. Differences in vocabulary. In Chinese languages, words are represented by ideographic characters called Hanzi. Sometimes, Mandarin and Cantonese use different words represented by different Chinese characters to represent the same concept. And in other cases, the same Chinese character might have a somewhat different meaning or usage in either language. The difference in vocabulary could be as high as 50%. That's when comparing Mandarin to spoken Cantonese and written vernacular Cantonese. Here are some examples of different vocabulary. These words function as copula verbs, like is in English.
是
Is used in Mandarin. When read in Cantonese, it's pronounced,
C
but the typical Cantonese word is.
海
This character is also used in Mandarin and is pronounced,
细
but it's used with the basic meaning of relation or connection. These are negation words meaning no or not. In Mandarin, it's.
不
Again, this word is also used in Cantonese and pronounced,
but
but it's used more often in standard writing than the colloquial Cantonese word. This word is not used in Mandarin. These are the words for bus. In Mandarin, it's.
公共汽车
These 4 characters could be translated literally as something like public shared gas car, but normally these 2 characters form the word meaning public, and these 2 form the word meaning car. In Cantonese, it's.
巴士
a word derived from the English word bus. 2 Chinese characters with sounds similar to those of the word bus were chosen to represent this English borrowing. This type of borrowing from English is more common in Cantonese, particularly in the Hong Kong variety, because it was a dependent territory of the UK. In mainland China, Singapore, and Malaysia, simplified Chinese characters are used for Mandarin, while traditional characters are used in Taiwan. As for Cantonese, in Hong Kong and Macau, traditional characters are used. In Guangzhou and surrounding areas, people normally use simplified characters for Cantonese. Some people think that Mandarin is always written in simplified characters and that Cantonese is always written in traditional characters, but it's not that simple.